Hi, this is Carla King with the Author Friendly Podcast, a consumer's guide for self-publishers in audio format.
I've watched people who have some money or have some stuff saved, and they're like, okay, my first book, I'm going to do it right. And then they hire a marketing firm, and it just doesn't go anywhere. And I think we might be done with that age.
Today we'll be exploring BetaBooks. It's a tool that fiction and nonfiction authors of all kinds can use to get feedback from their beta readers before they publish. BetaBooks launched in September of 2017, and as of now, in mid-year 2018, authors have used it to beta over 1,000 books. I was truly delighted to find BetaBooks late last year when the product was in beta itself, and I used it to invite readers to check that the information in my self-publishing guide was correct. It worked amazingly. It's actually a reader management system that helps you privately or publicly share your books with readers that you already know and trust to gather the feedback that you need to strengthen your story. And it also is a great tool to strengthen your fan community, right? So it's used for early marketing. We'll talk a lot about that too. And this all happens while you're producing a better book. We're talking with Paul Kilpatrick. He's in Raleigh, North Carolina, and he's co-founder of BetaBooks along with Andrew Burleson, who lives in San Francisco. Hey, Paul, how are you?
I'm great, Carla. How are you doing?
Good to meet you again on the web here.
I know, it's fantastic.
I'd love to start with the origin story of BetaBooks. How did you think of it? Why did you start it?
Well, BetaBooks is Andrew Burleson and myself, Paul, and we were friends, and we lived about, I want to say, a block and a half away from each other. And Andrew wrote a book and then just started distributing it to get some feedback from beta readers and his critique circle and his writer friends over email. And he asked me to read it as well. And then about a week into that process, we were having dinner at his house, and he said, what a headache. I am getting all these emails. I've lost feedback. I had to reformat my document 3 or 4 times to get it to all the different people that are reading it. And I started making revisions as soon as I got my first round of feedback from one friend. And then I started sending out new copies of the book. And now I've lost track of who has which draft of my book, who has actually read something, how far they've gotten. People are putting their feedback in emails, and I'm losing stuff because it's in an email about casual stuff, and then all of a sudden there's a comment about my book. This seems like a problem that we can solve with technology. I think I want to make a tool that will let me do all this without having to worry about organizing stuff. Does that sound like a good idea, Paul? And I said, that sounds like a great idea. You should totally do that. And I had not started his book yet, and so I kind of dropped the challenge. I'll read your book when I can read it on the software you're describing. And he made a version of it that worked in about 10 days, kind of the most basic version. And so I was like, I only bought myself 10 days. But then I began to read his book. And a bunch of the people who he had asked to read his book on BetaBooks, the very first version, were also writer friends. And they said, this is great. I want to use this to share my book with my early readers. Can I do that? And so we immediately started inviting people and letting them use it.
That's quite a problem you solved. I mean, I've been through the same thing, and I loved my experience with it, with the self-publishing bootcamp guide, just as a fact-checking machine. And I'm looking forward to centralizing the comments on my upcoming books. I'm a nonfiction author. I write memoir and how-to books, but I have a feeling that there are more fiction authors on your platform, or is that true?
There are, just percentage-wise, I think a few more fiction writers, but we do have quite a few nonfiction writers. They use the process a little bit differently because fiction writers are often looking for more kind of opinion or how a book is making them feel at a certain point, or tone, color, world building, that kind of stuff. Whereas nonfiction authors will often invite a bunch of experts and say, okay, like fact check me, like you just said, fact check me. Is the process clear? So they're looking for different types of feedback, but the fundamental problem of sharing, collecting the feedback, and tracking readers, that kind of stuff is the same. And so we find that they use the tool in a very similar way.
So it's pretty simple. And why don't we just start by going through what you do? So you sign up for an account and there is a free version, right?
So you sign up for an account, there's a free version. And once you sign up, you can upload your book and you invite readers.
So let me stop you there. So you upload your book. Do you upload your Word document or do you upload it chapter by chapter? How's that go?
Well, you can copy and paste it in chapter by chapter, which is kind of the default easiest way to do it. You copy and paste and, everything does that.
So we're not worrying about any formatting yet or any of that complicated stuff.
No, we're designed to be pre-press and pre-typesetting because people are going to presumably go through and do an edit after this, and you shouldn't really typeset before you're doing your final edits. But we do also have a bulk uploader, so you can upload from your Word or from your Scrivener file or your Markdown file. So there's a bunch of different ways to upload. The bulk uploader requires a little bit of formatting. It takes about 5 minutes to format a document to do it, and then it will split your chapters all up and name your chapters, and it's pretty easy to do.
Nice.
And we have a video guide and everything on the site to help you figure that out.
Yeah, and it was pretty easy. I think because I used BetaBooks when you were in beta, I don't think you had that bulk uploader yet. So that's nice to hear. But I was really impressed with just the interface when I got into a chapter. Also, the fact that in every chapter, you can instruct your readers, don't look for typos, don't copy edit me, just make sure I'm telling the right story or if my character is likable. Tell me about that, side by side chapter and feedback and instruction interface on the page.
Sure. So the original formatting was basically to give people a chance to give high-level feedback, so chapter by chapter. And so what we did was give readers a chance to enter feedback at the end of every chapter. They can either do it once they've finished, or, like you said, there's a side-by-side view where they can leave it as they go along. And to facilitate the best feedback from that, we give authors the opportunity to leave instructions for feedback for the entire book, and then also chapter-specific feedback. So at the beginning or the end or both of any chapter, an author can say, in this chapter, there's going to be the meet cute between the romantic pair. Keep an eye out for it. At the end, I'd like to hear what you thought of it. And that kind of primes your readers for something to happen in that chapter. If you instead want them to read and then be cued about something that happened, you can say, hey, you just read this introduction of this character who will be important later. Tell me how that introduction went. Or the conflict was introduced, in this chapter. What did you think of that? So we try to provide a number of different options for authors to cue their readers for what kind of feedback they want.
And so when your readers give their feedback, can everybody see everybody else's feedback, or is it private?
That's an author option. So there are two setups. One is that it can be all private. So just the reader and the author can see what is said, which is great for a lot of nonfiction stuff, especially if you're inviting, say, experts and stuff that you don't want interacting with each other. But for a lot of fiction authors, what they will do is there's an option to share feedback. And the way that works is a reader can read the chapter, then leave their feedback. And once they've submitted their feedback, then they can then see what other people have said. And a lot of fiction authors like that because what they're doing is kind of creating a community experience. So you can go either way.
That's new since I use it too. That's pretty awesome. Now, the thing is you need to I brought my own beta readers to the platform. Is there any way you're helping people get beta readers?
There are. So primarily we encourage authors to get their own beta readers because we think that's a big part of building your platform and your community and your readership. And it's a good way to use your newsletter. And if it's your first book, it's also a great kind of way to practice finding your first readers. I mean, what better way to learn how to sell your book than selling it to the first 5 people you want to read it? That being said, a lot of people are looking for help finding beta readers. So we have a couple of things that we've tried and are still experimenting with. We recently launched what we're calling beta book clubs, which is a way for a curator to choose a book. And that curator basically gathers the readers and says, hey, I have this group of 100 readers who are, for instance, romance fans, and I will choose a manuscript once a month and share it with these people. So we have one of those going. It's called Pam's Beta Jam. It's actually been going for over a year now in a different format, but it was working so well we decided to open the idea up and see if we could get some more curators to open their own book clubs. And basically what we do in Pam's Beta Jam is Pam chooses two or three books a month and then shares it with a group of people she has. And that ends up with someone basically getting about 15 people reading through their book. But we're looking for more people to do that. We're talking to a couple people who've had some interest in starting that. And we're also going to continue to experiment with ways to let authors maybe try to query people through a reader directory and say, hey, here's a one-sentence pitch of my book. Would you be interested in beta reading it? So we're continuing to try to find ways to help people connect with readers.
But let me ask you a little bit about your background and your day job and your work and how that has informed BetaBooks.
Yeah. So kind of the blanket statement from most of what my jobs have done would probably be like creative service management. So I worked in publishing out of college in comic books, actually, comic books and graphic novels. So that was my first introduction to publishing. So I was doing TXLA and ALA and the BEA and all those kind of festivals right at the time when comic books were making major inroads into bookstores and that kind of stuff. So that was kind of my first splash there. But because comic books is a very creator-driven industry, and I was working in indie comics, I would go from these conversations with people who were essentially putting out their first book on a monthly schedule and getting their stuff sorted out, and then going and meeting with the buyer at Amazon who was looking to stock more graphic novels. And so it was a very interesting kind of chance to see both of those sides and how they interact or don't interact and what was working for people. And then from there, I went to a video game community site up in Seattle, and basically saw how video games were being made, but was also still working with Random House, getting their collections published and that kind of stuff. And I mean, it's another community of people who are very passionate, and fan base is very important, and connecting with fans and community development is very important. And then from there, I moved into film production, and I work in film production. I work in music festivals, and so. Once again, it's a lot of how do you mobilize a team to get a creative vision out, and how do you focus creative people onto the task at hand. I work on a lot of commercials where you have a lot of people who have a lot of amazing creative ability, and then they're just kind of trying to channel that into getting this product that's very specific and often kind of very structured out. So I work with a lot of people who are very creative, and a lot of places that intersect kind of commerce and creativity.
Interesting. And then Andrew, if you could speak for Andrew and what he does and what his day job is.
So Andrew's a software developer. He's very good. And he also is a writer. So those are his two things. And as long as I've known him, he's been in software development. When I met him, he was kind of like a hired gun. He would go in, and the company he worked for would be hired by larger companies to go in and solve certain problems. And now he works for a large software company in San Francisco as one of their software engineers. And he also writes fiction on the side and is a father. And he also is very interested in kind of urban sustainability. So he's a member of a group called Strong Towns. And so he has an architecture background. And so that's kind of a passion of his as well. But it's interesting because kind of the same thinking seems to overlap, which is what are the kind of counterintuitive and research-driven ways that a community can thrive as a city or as a town, and that kind of stuff. And I think that crosses over pretty powerfully to how do you sustain an author career.
Wow. Yeah, that's amazing. I can see that. I have not found anything else like this on the web. So, when I needed feedback on my self-publishing guide, I was thrilled to find you. You're different from anything else out there. Is that right?
As far as I know, there's not anyone doing what we do specifically. What we've discovered when we talk to a lot of authors is one of two things, which is they weren't betaing, and because it seemed like a big time commitment, and kind of in the classical way it is, or what they had done was they had cobbled together a system where they were using kind of spreadsheets and an email list and Google Docs for sharing PDFs, and maybe a forum, and combining a bunch of different tools. And it was still time commitment, time consuming for them, but they were finding enough value in the process to do it. We've even talked to some people who would basically just hire an assistant for 6 weeks to run their beta because of the organizational issues with it. And so organizational issues is basically what technology handles best. And so we decided, let's automate all that and make it easy for people. The thing that we've most noticed and that we most encourage people now is to think of their beta not just as a part of producing their book, producing their product, but also think of their beta as either the beginning or maybe an integral part of the marketing buildup, both for an individual book as well as their platform as an author as a whole. Because I mean, it's a great thing. If you think of movies now, people are sharing screenshots or on-set shots or trailers and all these things, and it's a process of sometimes years to build the excitement. Bands do the same thing. They have behind the scenes or backstage, or they're releasing songs in process, and what that does is build a community of people who are like, oh, I'm committed to this thing. And the beta is a great way to do that. It's also a great way to get market research, and to build a community and to establish reader closeness. And so we encourage people to think of it as both a part of their production process and a part of their marketing process.
Right, because these people are going to be your street team at book launch, and they're going to be the first ones to post reviews on Amazon. And you need a lot of those, and that's worth a lot of money. I see a lot of authors doing nothing until their book is almost ready and then paying some high-priced publicity company to make their launch successful, and it rarely, if ever, works. And I'm sort of getting into the price points here, and you mentioned people using author assistants, for example, to run their launches, which costs a lot of money. So currently, the cost to use BetaBooks, there's a free tier. I think you can upload one book and invite 3 readers.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's basically a way, if you have a larger readership, to test out the software. And for a lot of authors who are maybe betaing their first book, uploading a book and inviting 3 people is probably a pretty good starter beta. And that's what that price point, that's what the free tier is about. And then the next tier up is $15 a month for as many books as you want, up to 20 readers. And then there's a tier above that, which is unlimited readers, unlimited books, $35 a month.
$35 a month, right? That's a whole lot less than a personal assistant, that's for sure.
Yeah. Oh, yes. And then also there's a couple other things that are packaged in there. At the higher tier, for instance, there's private message boards that you can run for all your beta readers. So if you don't have a forum or a message board, you can use that on BetaBooks. It's just you as the author manage it, and you can either use it as basically a billboard to post announcements, or you can have open conversations between the people in your beta. Currently, we've introduced like a highlighter inline comment mode. And we were talking earlier about how most people use chapter length feedback, but some people want typos pointed out and stuff like that. And so we introduced a highlighter mode that's currently in beta, but that's going to be a paid tier tool. And stuff like that gets introduced, at the higher tiers to help manage a larger kind of beta team and that kind of thing.
Do you have a newsletter where we can keep up with all this stuff?
We do. We have a newsletter. It's available at betabooks.co where you can sign up. It's fairly focused on tools and what we're doing kind of to promote the site. And when I say tools, I mean technology upgrades.
Yeah. Where else are you active? Are you active on Facebook or Twitter?
We are not super active on Facebook or Twitter. Just Andrew, my co-founder, and I both have day jobs. And so most of what we do is personal emails with people who use the site. So every author who shows up will get an email from one of us just saying hi and welcome. And we found that to be pretty invaluable in finding out what people need. Right. And a big focus for Andrew and I is serving the people that are on the site as best as possible and letting them talk to other people, because word of mouth is the best marketing. We go to events, and we have a podcast called How Authors Work, where we talk to authors pretty in depth about their process, the technology they use. And yeah, Carla was on it. It was fantastic.
I was one of those. And I have to say, that's awesome. I've listened to a few of those. It's really interesting how learning about the different processes people use to write and to share and to publicize their books, how authors work. And it's available on iTunes and Stitcher and everywhere.
Yeah, all those places.
You've done a whole bunch of them by now, right?
I think we're over 20. And so we kind of had a first season of about 20, and we've been on a little bit of a break just because of time commitments and getting the next batch lined up. But we've now recorded, I think, 4 or 5 of what we're kind of thinking of as our second season. It's been pretty fun.
You know what? It helps me realize that it's not easier for everybody else than it is for me.
No, and I think one of the things that Andrew and I really enjoy about it is that I think authors face many of the same challenges as a group, And because they're a creative group and often an independent group, they will find different ways of solving those problems. And we're really encouraged by the fact that people can say, oh, this one thing that this author does to solve this part of the problem, that's something I can do. That works with my process. And so we really enjoy saying, okay, once you've gotten to the end of your first draft, like, what do you do? And asking questions that at first I think Andrew and I were afraid that they would be too nerdy for anyone to care about. But it seems that people enjoy that kind of granular conversation.
I agree. We like it. We geek out on writing and writing tools and technology tools.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
You've learned a lot about what authors do and what they need. So just to close, I'd like to ask you if you have a single most important takeaway or piece of advice for the authors who are listening to us.
Well, I mean, I encourage all authors to think about betaing their books. Not everyone does, but there's a lot of value in the process, even if it's not specifically getting a better book out of the process. It's a powerful marketing tool. And I think people should be thinking about different ways to engage their readers and create a closer bond with them. And I think a beta is an amazing tool for that. And just having worked in film and a little bit in music and video games and other industries, that opportunity, if a creator could directly interact with his or her fans in the way the beta allows, they would just rush to it. And so I think authors should be rushing to beta their books.
I think you're right.
That's great that you mentioned the kind of waiting till the end and then hiring a big marketing firm. Andrew and I were just talking about that last night. I've done the same thing you've done. I've watched people who have some money or have some stuff saved and they're like, okay, my first book, I'm going to do it right. And then they hire a marketing firm and it just doesn't go anywhere. And I think we might be done with that age. I think people are so savvy, and especially when they know it's someone's first book, they are much more willing to have an awkward interaction and exchange with a genuine person who they know is the person behind something than something that's moneyed and planned out. And it's very interesting to watch. The thing that we've most noticed and that we most encourage people now is to think of their beta not just as a part of producing their book, producing their product, but also think of their beta as either the beginning or maybe an integral part of the marketing buildup, both for an individual book as well as their platform as an author as a whole. Because I mean, it's a great thing. If you think of movies now, people are sharing screenshots or on-set shots or trailers and all these things, and it's a process of sometimes years to build the excitement. Bands do the same thing. They have behind the scenes or backstage, or they're releasing songs in process. And what that does is build a community of people who are like, oh, I'm committed to this thing. And the beta is a great way to do that. It's also a great way to get market research and to build a community and to establish reader closeness. And so we encourage people to think of it as both a part of their production process and a part of their marketing process.
Thanks so much, Paul.
Yeah. Thank you, Carla.
So that's it for now. I hope you'll listen in on the next episode of the Author Friendly Podcast. You can find the show notes at www.authorfriendly.com, and you'll also find links to places you can find me on the socials. Also, free resources like my Consumer's Guide for Self-Publishers with reviews of all the tools, services, and products you'll hear about on this podcast. And hey, if you like the podcast, I'd appreciate a quick or a detailed review on iTunes or Stitcher. It helps a lot to float the podcast to the top so more authors can find it. All that and more on authorfriendly.com, and a preview of what you'll hear next week too. Signing off till then, thanks for listening.